I am being carefully accurate in saying we are the leader in cleaning the election rolls. We are the leader in making sure that our elections aren't ruined by post-election day counting of ballots that arrive late. We filed another brief, an election before the Supreme Court on the issue of gaining access to voter records. You know, the states are playing a game, and frankly, the courts are playing along in some jurisdictions, where that they don't want to let anyone gain access to the voter records because they don't want them to be cleaned up or have their corrupt oversight of the record, the management of federal voter records exposed. And we filed an amicus brief with the Allied Educational Foundation, a great supporter that pushes for the rule of law as well on all sorts of issues. And an amicus brief is a friend of court brief. What we're doing is we're filing a brief, and we're not a party, meaning, you know, we're the one suing or defending a decision or appealing a decision. We're just trying to educate the court on matters of fact and law that they may want to consider. And in this case, there was a decision up in the Third Circuit, which oversees Pennsylvania, that prevented a great group that does great election law work as well, the Public Interest Legal Foundation. I encourage you to look them up and look at their great activity. They're a nonprofit public interest law firm dedicated to election integrity. And they had sued for access to Pennsylvania voter rolls following a failure to disclose an estimated 100,000 non-citizen registered voters. Pennsylvania officials reportedly admitted that for decades, the Department of Motor Vehicles had allowed non-U.S. citizens to register to vote through the state's motor voter bill or system. So you go in, you get a driver's license, which they were giving, I guess, to non-citizens. Remember, it's not just illegal aliens who can't vote in federal elections, it's also aliens. People, if you're not a citizen, you can't vote even if you're here otherwise legally. So I guess they were letting these non-citizens apply and get voter registration. So I guess my guess is they want to figure out if any of those folks were voting. And essentially the court found the federal law that requires access to the records, the National Voter Registration Act, you're not harmed if you're denied it, if you're denied access to the records, which is a really ridiculous reading of federal law. As Judicial Watch highlights, I'll highlight this section here. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Again, this is another standing issue. So, and we kind of saw this in 2020, where the courts were trying to restrict the ability of President Trump mostly, and others to challenge election shenanigans and enforce election law. And they decided in 2020, and it is an inflection point, to stop allowing challenges to election laws for various and unpersuasive, and in my view, illicit reasons. And we're kind of seeing an echo of this still, where they're all of a sudden deciding that no one has standing to enforce federal law in terms of the cleanup of rolls, which Judicial Watch has been doing successfully for years. Or gaining, you know, and one of the ways you clean up the voter rolls is by looking at them and figuring out if they're clean or not and whether they're valid. And they don't want people to gain access to them despite federal law that requires access. The denial of access to public records, as we say, requested under the National Voter Registration Act's public disclosure provision, inflicts a concrete informational injury deeply rooted in centuries of common law tradition. The Third Circuit's decision departs from this precedent by imposing a novel nexus requirement demanding plaintiffs prove downstream harms beyond the denial itself. The ruling exacerbates a sharp and growing circuit split. Circuits like the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, adhere to this court's framework, finding standing upon denial alone. The Third Circuit's decision contains serious legal errors and directly conflicts with long-standing Supreme Court precedent. This court has held that a person who is denied requested public records suffers a concrete injury. The Third Circuit adopted a new requirement that conflicts with previous rulings by this court on the issue. So not only does this case show the need for urgent citizenship verification, they had 100,000 non-citizens on the rolls up in Pennsylvania, but it shows the need to affirm the right of citizens and groups like the Public Interest Legal Foundation, Judicial Watch, to examine the voter rolls. We are expert groups, by the way. We're not just folks coming in and, looking for people's social security number. We know what to look for under the law in order to enforce voter cleanup requirements. That include, among other things, making sure that non-citizens aren't on the rolls. Now, the Justice Department is begun asking questions about the rolls, and they're, of course, the left-wing states are fighting them because they know what's going on. There's finally a Justice Department who's interested in enforcing the rule of law when it comes to cleaning up the voting rolls. As I've often observed, dirty election rolls can mean dirty elections. That's why federal law requires not only access to the voting rolls to make sure that they're being cleaned up, but the requirement that states take reasonable steps to clean them up. And it's worth repeating that Judicial Watch is the national leader in enforcing the rule of law in that regard, having filed lawsuits and conducting legal actions that have led and caused the cleanup of 5 million ineligible names, meaning names of people who moved away, died, or otherwise shouldn't be on the rolls. All of those names have been cleaned up from the rolls in places like New York, 1 million plus names. Los Angeles County, 1 million plus names. Kentucky, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Colorado. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some states as well. And we've got ongoing lawsuits right now in Oregon, California, and Illinois to clean up millions more names. I was on Steve Bannon's program the other day, and he was completely shocked with this figure. But and I was talking with folks in the office about it because I gave it to him over kind of a back of the. I was basically just talking, and so I was guessing the number based on my prior memory of it. But I told Steve, I said there are 20 million names that need to be cleaned up from the voting rolls. There are 20 million names who are on the rolls who should immediately be cleaned up or eventually be cleaned up. And I'm talking about it with my colleagues here, and we came to the conclusion, based on an analysis of the data, that it's actually 24 million names. You heard that right. There are 24 million names, more or less. It's a guess, but it's a well-educated guess, based on prior analyses. And it fits with our analysis as well. There are 24 million names, nearly 25 million names that should be, and that's frankly a lower, it's arguably a very conservative figure. It could be as much as 30 million. But I'm willing to stand behind 24 million names need to be cleaned up from the rolls. And right now, as best as I understand it, Judicial Watch is the only, maybe the Republicans are suing in a state or two at this point, following our lead. But we've already cleaned up 5 million names, and there are millions more to be cleaned up in just the 3 lawsuits we filed. And more lawsuits could be coming because we are analyzing the voting rolls in the states based on the most recent election registration data and voting records. So I encourage you to support Judicial Watch's work in this regard, because I know I'm president of Judicial Watch, right? So I'm a little bit biased. But I am being carefully accurate in saying we are the leader in cleaning the election rolls. We are the leader in making sure that our elections aren't ruined by post-election day counting of ballots that arrive late. We are the leader in enforcing the rule of law on gerrymandering. All this craziness about gerrymandering, Judicial Watch has been fighting the gerrymandering fight for years. We won in Maryland. Democrats tried to rig, contrary to Maryland law, with partisan districts that were contrary to law. And a court struck them down, told them to start over again, thanks to Judicial Watch. Voter ID, we've been in court after court educating the courts on voter ID. We filed a lawsuit or filed an amicus brief on why Supreme Court precedent that allowed the use of race in gerrymandering decisions, where they can create a congressional district essentially based on race, is contrary to the Constitution. I know that it seems like a rather obvious point, but the Supreme Court, believe it or not, allows that racial segregation to go on. So I can go on and on. I've testified to Congress. My colleagues have testified to Congress on election integrity. No one doing the work the Judicial Watch is doing in this regard. And we're going to keep on doing it. And in fact, we're going to increase the work. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.